Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I first want to say hi to all my new subscribers. I saw that there are like a few people who are new here since I posted my last video, so I'm really excited and really grateful that you're here. But anyways, today I'm going to be talking about how I made this embroidery of Lorde's album cover for Melodrama. Let's just talk about this album for a little bit. I really like Pure Heroine. Pure Heroine. I always say it wrong. So, but when Melodrama came out, I kind of didn't like it as much. I kind of just felt like so-so about it. And, you know, it's kind of hard to beat Buzzcut Season and Ribs. It took me some time to come around to it, but my sister and I did end up getting tickets to the Melodrama tour because both of us were really big fans. And so I think when I went to the concert, that really like solidified the album for me. It was like an amazing experience, and like I think her performances are so emotionally vulnerable that it really did it for me. So as time went on and I started growing into adulthood, kind of coming out of the teen years, well, technically I'm still a teenager, but I'm gonna be 20 in like a few days. But anyways, this album is just something I really see with a new perspective now, and it's always something that I go back to. It's also one of those albums that has no skips for me, so I feel like that really says a lot. Anyways, all of this is to say I love and miss Lorde, and I wanted to make something to honor this beautiful album that's very meaningful to me. The painting is done by an artist named Sam McInnes, and Lorde talked about how it was supposed to be her after a long night, you know, lying in bed in the early morning, which definitely makes sense because of the theme of party culture, but also the dawn of a new beginning in a new stage of life. So I'm pretty sure the colors are also linked with her synesthesia, which makes sense, and that's super cool. So right off the bat, let's talk about how I prepared for this project. One of the hardest parts of an embroidery project is transferring the design onto your fabric. So what's really helpful is to have something printable to place on your fabric. And so this is definitely the most detailed embroidery project I've ever done, and I wanted it to look really true to the painting. So when thinking about the painting and thinking about how I wanted to stitch this, I thought about stitching in blocks of colors, kind of like a paint by numbers. That made me think of the image trace feature in Illustrator. Basically, you put an image into the program and it'll convert the photo into a bunch of different shapes so that it can be resized infinitely without losing any resolution. I tried a couple image trace options. I think I did high res photo, low res photo, and 12 color, but you can see that the tracings were too detailed and had so many shapes it would be impossible to stitch them. So I decided that I would have to go in myself and trace each section manually. For this, I just used the pen tool and clicked around each shape to make the process as simple as possible. It took a long time, probably a couple hours, but it was good to be able to choose how complex and detailed I wanted the outlines to be. I also want to mention that you don't need to use Adobe Illustrator to do this. You could use any program that lets you bring in an image and create another layer to trace over top of it. So I'm pretty sure using something just like Inkscape or GIMP, which are both free, or even Procreate would work just as well. In the end, it was totally worth it, and you can see the difference between the original image tracings and mine. After that, I decided I would try to make a color palette just to make it easier when it came time to pick out my thread colors. In the painting, there could be an infinite amount of colors because the artist can mix whatever colors they want, but that's not practical for an embroidery project, so it was helpful to have my limited, although still pretty big color palette in one place and know what I was going to use ahead of time. It was a little tricky because the image is in RGB, so the colors are really rich and vibrant, but I chose colors in CMYK because I figured the colors that I had in embroidery floss would be more similar to that. So here's how the final tracing looks along with the color palette. In the past, I've either drawn the pattern on the fabric freehand or printed out a pattern and then traced it onto the fabric with carbon transfer paper. But for a bigger, more heavily detailed project, I knew I wanted to use the sticky water-soluble stabilizer. I ordered this on Amazon. I just got this. It's like a sticky stabilizer. You can print any pattern that you want, and then you stick it onto the fabric that you have, and then once you're done stitching it, you put the fabric in water, and this stabilizer will dissolve. And so I have my design. I did a test print on regular paper just to make sure that I liked it, and I think it looks good. So I'm gonna print out this design on the stabilizer now. Okay, wow. So I just printed it and it looks really good. You can see like this is kind of the texture. I'm just going to peel off the back and stick it onto the fabric that I have. A couple things I didn't mention there. I printed out the pattern in an 8x8 square. Also, one thing I realized at the end of this project is that you should probably wash your fabric before placing the stabilizer on it. Your fabric might shrink a little bit in the wash, and you want to know how big the fabric will actually be before you start working on it. But after the stabilizer was on, it was time to put the hoop on. This one is a 10-inch hoop from Michaels, and then it was time to start. As for my process, it's honestly really simple. I take the embroidery floss and split it in half, and originally it has 6 strands, so I split it down to 3 and just thread it through the needle. Then I tie off the end and start stitching. All I did here is just basic hand sewing. All I really had to do was just fill in the spaces like I paint my numbers. The hard part is having the patience to finish because it takes a really long time. But it's also been a great way to catch up on other things like podcasts or TV shows. During this project, I've been rewatching Phineas and Ferb on Disney+. And the crazy thing is, I didn't even finish the first 3 seasons before finishing this piece. And so I ended up watching about 100 episodes, which amounted to over 38 hours. Okay, but anyways, that's enough of me talking. I think I'll let you sit and watch some stitching for a bit and enjoy some background music too.
There is a minor single tiny ingredient missing, like salt, for example, one dies.
Hello. So I just wanted to pop back in and talk about finishing the facial features. I left the eyes, nose, and mouth for last because they're the defining features of the whole painting. If any of you have ever watched Baumgartner Restoration, it's basically where this guy professionally restores old paintings, and it's amazing. It's so relaxing and beautiful. But whenever he's fixing damaged paint, he always talks about how he loves doing the face and the eyes in particular because it gives life to the painting. And I just knew I really had to get the eyes right. And so what you're seeing here is when I did it the first time, but I wasn't happy with it, so I redid it. And I also ended up redoing the lips too because they just didn't look right to me. They seemed a little bit like creepy or lifeless the first time, so I just had to fix it. The last thing to do was to fill in the background. Here, I didn't separate the floss, I just left it with 6 strands and tried to emulate the texture from the original painting. And then, just like that, the stitching was done. The stitching took a total of 12 days, and here are the pictures of the progress from each day. I really love seeing it all come together. It's really satisfying after working on it for so long. Now, all that there was left to do was to prepare the piece for framing. The first thing was to wash out the stabilizer, which I was really excited to do. I filled up my basin with warm water and cut off the excess around the edges. Then, I placed the fabric in the water and let it sit for a few minutes.
I tried to scream, but my head was underwater.
You can see a bunch of little filaments started coming off. It was really interesting. And then I repeated this process 2 more times before the water coming out of the fabric was clear. Then I just let the fabric air dry. This was when I noticed that soaking the linen had actually caused it to shrink. Before soaking, the stitch square had been about 8 by 8 inches, but after soaking it was about 7 by 7. So that's why I should have washed the fabric ahead of time, but it didn't end up being a big deal in the end. After the fabric was dry, I ironed it to remove all the wrinkles, and then it was time to frame. So for the frame that I got, which is a 10 by 10 inch, I decided that I wanted to stretch the fabric around a piece of cardboard, and then I would remove the glass from the frame so it kind of looked like a stretched canvas. I found an old box and measured a 10 by 10 square and cut it out with a rotary cutter, but you could also just do this with scissors too. Before stretching the fabric, I made some markings in pencil on the fabric that I would line up with the edge of the cardboard so I knew the embroidery was centered. Then I flipped over and started stitching the edges together. I split the floss in half here, and this ended up using quite a lot of thread, so I ended up tying a bunch of pieces together since I didn't want to use one really long thread because that would definitely get tangled. I used a couple needles that I had lying around to pin the corners down, which was really helpful. You can also see that the embroidery wasn't exactly in the middle of my fabric, and thankfully there was just enough fabric for this to still work, but next time I'll have to be more careful about that. And then, the stretched fabric was ready to go into the frame. I took the glass out of the frame and put the cardboard in it, and it was a little bit of a struggle to close the fasteners on the frame, but I did ended up getting it in there, and so this project was finally finished, and here's how it turned out. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really excited with how it turned out, and I can't wait to put it on my wall. I think this one will definitely be coming to school with me. So anyways, I hope you're having a nice summer. I hope you're staying safe out there, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.